Okay, personal things about myself. My full name is Jacob Leonard Schacter. Most people around know me as Len. How did I come to have? Well, I have two first names. Most people knew me as Len, and it was a problem when I started using my full name. When I was 14 years old, I wanted to work during the summertime, and in Philadelphia back then, I'm a native of Philadelphia, you needed a working certificate, and that came from the school system. And in order to get that, you had to bring a birth certificate. So I asked my father, he gave me the copy of the birth certificate, and I looked at it. I said to him, there's a mistake on here. He said, the birth certificate says Jacob Leonard Schacter. It should be the other way around. He said, no. He says, that's your name. So I asked my mother, and she said, well, here's the story. She said, when you were 6 years old and I took you to Ludlow School at 6th and Master in North Philadelphia to register you for school, I didn't want to register you as Jacob because Jewish boys in that time whose names were Jacob, they were called Jakey. She says, I didn't like that, so I registered you as Leonard. So here I am with the two names. So when I started to work, I had to get a Social Security card number, so I had registered under my full name. And then when I enlisted in the Army in 1946, I told the clerk there, and he said, you register under your full name and you list everything else as aliases. So since then I've been using, well, officially I am Jacob L. Schachter, but everybody knows me as Len. Sometimes I get called Len, sometimes I'm called Ed, the other. Some of my former students, I've gotten them to the point where they call me Len. They don't call me Mr. Schachter anymore. Some of their grandparents. Why should they call me Mr. Schachter? Oh, other than that, I was born in 1927. Both my parents were immigrants. My father came from Romania. My mother was born in Jerusalem in 1909 when it was part of the Turkish Empire. Warfare in the Middle East during World War I, the British took over everything, and that was a British mandate when she came to the United States. What else can I tell you? I went to public schools in Philadelphia, except for my senior year of high school. I finished that in New York City when I went to the seminary, and that was a mistake because I had to take the New York State Regencies, state examinations. That was a pain. It was a pain. And then, after military service, from 46 to 49, I went to Temple University. I have 2 degrees from there. I have a bachelor's and a master's. And I have graduate courses from Yeshiva University's graduate school, and also from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where I took courses. Oh yes, I also took a number of courses at a school in Chicago called Illinois State Teachers College South. How did I get to that? There was a program after the Russians shot up their first Sputnik way back when, and the United States suddenly decided that we were behind them in science. So Congress passed a National Defense Education Act for advanced studies in all sciences and languages. So I took the 2 language courses in the Hebrew language field, and they were taught by Yeshiva University in New York, and the second level of that program was in Israel at the Hebrew University, and I was a public school teacher in Philadelphia. I taught 7 years in a junior high school, an inner city junior high school, and when the Hebrew teaching job at Northeast High School became available, I was able to transfer there, and I worked there for Northeast High, 28 years. And then when language numbers went down, I was able to become the organization chairman. I have an administrative background from the service, and I was responsible for the records of 4,500 students at the school and other kinds of stuff like that. One of my favorite childhood memories, probably going back to elementary school. And in elementary school, in my days, teachers were only women. The only man in the school, actually there were two men, one was the principal, the other was the custodian. And of the teachers, probably if I were to think of the 6 teachers that I had, from 1st through 6th grade would be my 6th grade teacher, Miss Anna Edelman. And for whatever the reason, I would say that all of the boys fell in love with her, and after we graduated from the 6th grade, went on to another school, and back in those days you received a report card 3 times a semester, so we would walk back to the old school and show her our report cards. Did it all the way through high school. Favorite teacher, I would suppose. There was just something about her that, as I said to someone else once before, that's probably why I became a teacher. How did I meet my wife? Well, I have to say my late wife. She passed away 5 years ago. We were both in 11th grade at the time, and in addition to public school, well, I was at Central High at the time and she was at Gratz High School. We were students at Gratz College. Gratz College is a Hebrew college in the city of, at the time, in the city of Philadelphia. We were classmates at the time. And so we knew each other from that time, from time that we were in 11th grade. At the end of 11th grade, I did not continue on to the 12th grade at Central High. I went to New York and I was a rabbinical student at one of the seminaries there. But I was home for the, what time it was that I was home. There was a Hebrew-speaking club at Gratz College, and I had been a member of it, and I found out that there was a meeting of the club at the time that I was home on, I think, a weekend vacation somewhere in December. So I went to the meeting and I met Jean, my late wife, and she told me that she's going to be in New York at the end of the year visiting her cousins. So I asked her for a date and she said yes. We went to the movies, and at the end of the movies, you know, in Times Square, I took her back to her cousin and I said goodnight. I went back to the seminary, and that was the last time that I saw her, because I finished out that second semester of the seminary, and that's when I left and I enlisted. 3 years later, December 31st, I woke up in the morning in January and I realized I had a dream and she was in the dream. I'd been corresponding with another girl. So I wrote to the other girl and I said, this is what happened in the dream. And about a couple of weeks later, I got a letter from Jean, who was to become my wife, because the other girl called her on the phone and said, you remember Len Schachter? So Jean said, yes. She said, so this other girl said, well, he's been dreaming about you. Why don't you write to him? So she wrote to me, and those were the last 6 months that I was in Japan, because that's when it happened. When I had that dream, December 31st of 1948. I came home in the middle of 49. And she was out of the country at the time. She was on a trip to Israel, and I called her when she came home. And we dated for a year, and we got married in December of 50, and the rest was history. Okay? That's how we met, in case you're interested. I was a high school teacher, part of my career, and I had a habit of starting the school year, especially if they were new students to me. I would not start teaching from the very beginning. What I would do is I would stand at the doorway as the new kids came in, And I would say, sit anywhere that you want to, because you know yourselves, you know who you are from your previous schools, and sit wherever you want to, wherever you feel comfortable. I would take roll, and then I would say something like this: look, we're going to be together for a year. You don't know me, and I don't know you. So let's do this. The first person over there, will go down the line this way, and just tell me who you are, what do you like, you know, whatever. Tell me anything you want to about yourself. And that would go on for about I would say the first 3 days. I didn't teach the first 3 days. Then, as a good teacher, you have to know the students' names, you have to know where they sit, and I would say again something like this: look, you've told me all about yourselves. We'll get to me in a moment or two. Where do you want to sit? Are you comfortable where you're sitting? I don't seat students alphabetically. If you're happy where you're sitting, okay. I'll pass a chart around, put your name and your advisory number. That's your permanent seat for the school year. Then I said, all right, for 3 days you've told me all about yourself. What do you know about me? What do you want to know about me? And all kinds of questions. The girls will always start off, are you married? I said, yes. You have any kids? I said, yes. How old are they? I would look around and I say, the same ages as you are, and I know exactly what makes you tick. Okay? And then we would get started and we would be together for the year. Now, in addition to that, they knew from the very first day, second day, maybe the first week, I also said to them, look, we have counselors in the school, but if you need somebody that you want to talk to, you don't want to go to the counselor, you don't want to talk to your big brother or sister, come and talk to me. I don't repeat anything. And you'd be surprised, it happened. Now, I can tell you one story about a young lady who was a student of mine in my Hebrew language class. I taught modern Hebrew at one of the high schools in Philadelphia. She came to me one day. She said, I need somebody to talk to. I said, come. I said, I'll take you up to your counselor. No, I want to talk to you. She was in the 11th or 12th grade at the time, and she and her boyfriend wanted to get married. And I looked at her and I said, what are you, 17 years old, 18 years old? What's your rush? So we talked, and that talk lasted for practically the entire school year. As it was, we both had the same lunch period, so she would meet me either in the students' lunchroom, or she'd come over to the language office and we would talk, or else we would walk the corridors of the ground floor where my classroom was for the year. Well, she and her boyfriend never left school, you know, to get married, and they went off to college. And every year, right before Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year's, I'd get a card from her. 4 years later, guess what came in the mail? Invitation to their wedding. And my late wife and I went. We went to her wedding. And I'm still in touch with her all these years later. Okay? One of my favorite stories of one of my favorite students. And when her mother passed away, I happened to see the obituary in the paper. I sent her a condolence card. And another time, one of her children passed away. I sent her a condolence card too. And I got a phone call from her. When my wife passed away, she came to see me. One of my students. My greatest accomplishment, I don't know about greatest, there are a lot of accomplishments. One that I'm happy to tell people about, it's not my greatest accomplishment, but it is an accomplishment that doesn't happen all the time. In the service, when I was in the Army, I was stationed in Japan after World War II, and as luck would have it, I was in a small unit, in a military government unit. Japan was an occupied country, and they were told what to do as far as being occupied. Of course, our job in military government was to do surveillance, that they did what they were ordered to do by the occupying powers. And the first year and a half, I worked in 3 of the sections of the military government team. During the first 6 months, I was assigned to work in the public welfare section of the military government team. The second 6 months, I was transferred to civil education, and I visited schools, elementary schools, middle schools, senior high schools, but not into the university area. And following that, I was moved over to what we called the legal and government section. And there, one of the things that I did was I visited police stations and prisons in the prefecture. Prefecture is a French word. It's similar to our use of the word state. Why? Because at that particular moment they were interested in higher headquarters higher headquarters was interested in knowing that prisoners were not being mistreated. So I visited prisons and police stations, among many other things, as well as polling places when democratic voting was introduced. One funny little episode was I stopped a man from beating his wife because he wanted her to vote the way he wanted, and she said no, and he was hitting her with his briefcase. So stopped the Jeep, I got out, and I told my interpreter, tell him no. Okay, after that, our executive officer, Major Hutton, called me into his office and told me he's going to move me to what we call the orderly room. That's the personnel office, which I did and I did personnel work for the last year and a half of my service. But a very interesting thing I did, which was probably illegal, but there's an expression in the military services, especially in the Army, that there's nothing that sergeants can't do. It's the same thing in the Navy. The petty officers, there's nothing that they can't do. You just don't ask the officer. You go ahead and you do it on your own volition, and it's accepted. What happened was this. I was the only Jewish enlisted man in my unit, and I took what we call charge of quarters over Christmas time, from the 24th of December until the 26th of December in the morning, so the other fellows could do, observe the holiday, go to the movies. Christmas Eve, the night of the 24th, I was sitting in the orderly room, and telephone rang. The duty officer calling from 8th Army headquarters in Yokohama wants to speak to our duty officer. Well, I told him our duty officer's not around, he's making his rounds, but I am authorized to take care of things. And he asked me, you have an enlistment by such and such a name? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you have to send him back home. And the story was this, which none of us in the outfit knew. His father was a bird colonel, a full colonel, working in the Pentagon, and unfortunately his mother passed away, and they're going to hold the funeral until he could come back. I told him, I said, please, I told the duty officer at 8th Army headquarters in Yokohama, I said, sir, if you'll give me all the information, I'll see to it that our duty officer gets the information, and we'll take care of it. We'll see that he gets sent home. I sat down and I said, my God, how are we going to send him home? This is the only way you could get overseas back in my time was on a troop ship. And what were we going to do? Send him to the replacement depot, and he'll sit around there waiting for a troop ship. It'll take him a year and a day to get back to Washington, where his family lived. So I sat down at my typewriter and I typed up special orders sending him home, quoting all of the appropriate things that had to be done. And back in those days, the only thing you could use was a mimeograph, copier. So I typed this on a stencil. Then I ran 20, 30 copies off, and it has to be signed. by the officer. So I simply reached over to the captain's desk and I took out his rubber stamp and I stamped, all the orders, okay? Had them ready. Well, about 9:30, the fellows came back from the movies and wherever else they had been, and I called them in and I told this fellow, I won't use his name, it's not important. It's important to me, but not for publication. And I told him what happened and he was dumbfounded. I told his roommate, take him upstairs, pack him up, bring him down, back to the order room. I told the other fellow, who was our supply sergeant, clear his records and bring them back to me. Okay, so they did that. It took about 15-20 minutes. They're all back in the orderly room, and then I said to them, look guys, go out to the motor pool, sign out a Jeep, pile in the Jeep, and take him to the nearest Air Force base, which was about 20-25 miles away. And I told him, I said, you go into the flight office, whatever they call it there, and you speak to the flight sergeant. Don't talk to an officer. We were all sergeants in my outfit. I said, you speak to the flight sergeant, you give him a copy of your orders, and get on the first plane that's flying out, wherever the plane is going. And when it lands, wherever it lands, you march yourself into the flight office. Again, you speak to the flight sergeant. Well, he went like this, across the Pacific. He was home in Washington in 48 hours. And of course, okay. He never came back to us because he was reassigned after everything settled down there. Now, another thing that we did in the military, they probably still do it, is that every day a morning report is made. You account for where every person is. And that was one of my jobs in the orderly room, besides taking care of everybody's records. Incidentally, I knew everybody's serial numbers. The only one I remember today is my own. So I typed up the morning report for the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th. Captain came back and I handed him the morning reports because he had to sign them. He looked at it and he said, where is what's his name? I'm not using his name. I said, well, sir, I sent him home. He said, what the hell did you do? How did you do that? I told him the story. He said, and I gave him a copy of the orders. He said to me, I didn't sign that. I said, well, I know where your rubber stamp is. And that was the end of it. About 2 weeks later, and we carried this fellow as absent, temporary duty. And about 2 weeks later, his roommate got a letter from him saying that he'd been reassigned somewhere. So we dropped him from our roles. Okay, fine. So as I said before, in the military service, you don't always need an officer, right, to do things. But things get done. If you know what to do, you do it. That's the scariest thing? Oh, sure. At the end of each month, military government, we had to send a report of the month's activities to the next higher headquarters, which would have been the military government region. And the region would collect these monthly reports from all of the teams and send them up to military government headquarters in Yokohama to the 8th Army headquarters. There was one time, it was during the summer of 1948, I got a phone call from our executive officer, Major Hutton, and he said to me that the courier left to go to the city of Kyoto, where our military government regional headquarters was, but one report was unfortunately not included, and it had to get up there. And he said, could you get a Jeep and drive it up? I said, sure, sure. I don't say sure to the Major. I said, yes, sir, I'll do it. I got a Jeep, and he came to my office, gave me the report, and I got in the Jeep. And I probably couldn't find it today, but I knew the shortest way to get to the city of Kyoto from the city of Kobe, where I was. There was one place on the road where it kind of went up, you know, in sort of an incline and came down on the other side. And I assume that those of you that are photographing me drive. There's something called road hypnosis. And what happened was this. The road that I was on went up a little bit, you know, sort of like a bulge in the road went up. And on the other side, it came to a it wasn't a crossroad, it was like two roads on a perpendicular that you remember from geometry. And I had to make a right turn there. And I missed it. I didn't make the right turn because I was probably thinking of something else. And there was no barrier there. The road that I was on simply ended. And I went sailing out. I landed in a rice paddy. And as I tell this story all the time, the big boss upstairs that we call God was probably very much looking out for me. The Jeep landed in the rice paddy, fortunately on the four wheels, not tipping over and over. Had it tipped over and over, I wouldn't be here to tell you the story today. I turned off the ignition, grabbed the report, and jumped out into, well, rice is grown in rice paddies, and the water is about anywhere from 10, 12, 15 inches deep. I landed, you know, jumped out, and the Jeep is there. Nothing happened, except that the front wheels became, instead of being straight like this, were bent in an angle. There's no way that I could drive it back up again because it was a steep hill. So I sat down on the road, and after a while I heard the sound of a vehicle coming. It was an old Japanese truck clunker, and I got out on the road and I waved it down, and an old Japanese man got out, and the Japanese that I knew, that I had learned in those 2 years, the first 2 years that I was there, wasn't enough. He looked down over the side of the road and he simply said, "Sa." He shook his head, climbed back in his truck, and took off. And I was sitting there in the middle of nowhere. And about a half an hour later, I heard the sound of another vehicle, and thank goodness this time it was an Army 3/4-ton truck. And I waved it down. Two fellows got out. One of them, he said, you know, the bottom of my pants, you know, were wet. He says, "Sarge, what are you doing out here?" I said, "My Jeep's down there." He said, "Oh, you too?" I started to laugh. I said, "Why did he say you too?" He said, "Lots of them go." I said, "Listen, you have a winch on your truck?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, fine. Let's got to go down there, and we have to winch it up." And they towed me into the city of Kyoto to military government headquarters there. I turned in the report, and I went to see the first sergeant, and I told him what happened. I said, "Lend me your telephone, I gotta call my outfit." So they took me, well, afterwards, we had to leave the Jeep there. There was no way that it could ride. And they took me over to the train station. I got back to my outfit, and I reported in, told the major what happened. And he said, "All right," he said, "you are an official business, so you don't have to pay for the damage to the Jeep." That was the one thing of danger. Other things, there are two other stories about danger there too. The worst that could have happened to me was right before I was supposed to be discharged, you know, to come back to the States for discharge. Again, it was the major who called me into his office. He and I were the two senior personnel in the outfit. He as an officer, and I as an enlisted man. Not in terms of rank, but in terms of time in the outfit. Called me in, and he said, "Here, I'd like you to read this message for him." I looked at it, and I said, "May I think about it?" And he said, "Sure, take all the time you want." Well, after another moment or two, I said, "Thanks, but no thanks." In the military service, if you are, at least in the Army, in the upper sergeant ranks, you can be recommended for an appointment to West Point, and I turned it down because I was ready to come home and start college. As it was in terms of danger, the class that I would have been in, because the Korean War started exactly a year later, the class that I would have been in had I gone to West Point was rushed through their last year, and they were all, practically all of them were sent to Korea, and they fell like flies. So that's a story of almost danger. Well, basically I'm quiet, but if somebody gets me talking, I talk and I don't stop. And many times I've been told that I repeat myself and tell the same story again and again and again, then I have to shut up. What else can I say? My favorite hobbies. I mean, other than sleeping? I have had over my lifetime 2 hobbies. Actually, it's really one, and that's collecting things. And what I collected was stamps and coins. I started first with stamp collecting, going back to a time when a cousin of mine, actually my mother's first cousin, who gave me 2 stamps. They were mint meaning they were never used, and unfortunately they disappeared, years and years and years ago. He was in Egypt during the First World War, not as a soldier, as a civilian, and he had some kind of a job in the British Army, and the 2 stamps that he gave me were overprinted with 3 letters, BEF, British Expeditionary Forces. And that started me on stamp collecting. You can learn an awful lot about a country or various countries around the world from collecting stamps. And then I went from collecting stamps from all over the world to specializing, if you want to use that word, in American stamps and in the stamps of Israel. And in both countries I collect stamps that are mint. When I say mint, I mean they're not used. I have roots in Israel. My mother was born in Jerusalem before World War I. So in the family there's tradition, and it's part of my background. Been there many, many times. Spent a sabbatical year there, 1970-71, and I've done volunteer work in Israel as well. Friendship is what I value the most, and it makes no difference who the people are. If we have some kind of rapport, as I would say, then that would be something that I value. I still have relationships with former students that I meet from time to time, and some of them will even remind me of things that I did for them that helped them. So friendship, yes. I've been retired now for about, I think, 22 years. Keep busy. There are things to do. Don't sit in the house or in the apartment and look at the 4 walls, and don't watch TV all the time. There are things to do. Go out and walk, meet people, and keep busy. And go to your doctor regularly. To be friendly with other people and to help other people whenever necessary, if they can. In any way, shape, or form. It can be monetarily, it can be helping yourself, because I still do that. I do volunteer work. I do volunteer work for the Jewish Family and Children's Services in the greater Philadelphia area. In the beginning, I used to visit patients in the hospital, Lankano Hospital, which is only about, 2 miles, 3 miles from here. The only patients I did not visit in the hospital were any patients who were in ICU or recovering, and maternity ward. But I would visit patients, Jewish patients, and I would check in with the hospital chaplain. I would get a list of patients, visit, talk, sit, talk, and if they needed anything, I would do whatever they wanted. I stopped doing that a number of years ago when I was asked to visit with homebound people. And I do that to this day. And if Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so or whoever it is can't make the date that we usually set in advance, so we talk on the phone, or I'll get an email from Bruce. I'm down to one person now, and he calls me on the phone. He says, "I'm not feeling well. Don't come." And we sit and we just yak away on the telephone, or he'll send me messages on the. I'll get an email and I'll respond to him. He finds something funny on the email, he'll send it to me. So I sent back an answer, thanks very much, it was funny, except this, that, and the other. And it's the same thing as if we were face to face. I have one brother who is 17 months younger than I am. He's a retired rabbi. Our sister is, I think, about 5 years younger than I am, and she is a retired she is a retired social worker. Her field was dealing with senior citizens, and she's also retired.
Were you close with them growing up?
Close growing up? Well, my brother and I probably yelled at each other growing up, but we are very, very close. And my sister, well, yes. To this day, when she calls me, the first words are generally, "Hi, big brother," and I say to her, "Hi, kid sister," and we just go on and talk. Yes, we are very close. In my family, the Schachters, not just the immediate family, but the extended family, all of my cousins and their children and grandchildren, we are, yes, very, very close. And we still get together without fail Thanksgiving time. We've been as many as 50 people getting together. And wherever we've been meeting, my house, your house, his house, her house, whatever, it's never been a burden on the host family because everybody brings food of different kinds. Nobody brings the same thing. Kids, I have three sons. Unfortunately, one of my daughters-in-law passed away a couple of years ago. And I have 6 grandchildren, actually 7 because my oldest granddaughter got married. So I have 7 grandchildren now. And in October, I will become a great-grandfather. And we are close. When my wife passed away, the grandchildren, of course, were very concerned about me. And I know that they spoke among themselves, and what happened was that I got a phone call from each one during the course of the weeks until this day. It's already 5.5 years, and I know that they were in cahoots with each other because the first 2 questions, or maybe not the first 2 questions, but in the course of conversation to find out about me, what I'm doing, how I am, there were 2 questions. One, how are you doing? And the other question is, are you eating properly? Yes, we are very close. So I have this to say to future generations of my family. Keep doing what we've been doing all along. Don't give up the annual Thanksgiving get-together, and talk to each other as we do all the time anyway. And don't wait for a tragedy that happens in the family. If someone passes away, everybody comes, whatever. But there's always a connection. You pick up the phone and you call the next person.